The autumn rain was falling hard over Portland International Airport on November 24, 1971, when a nondescript man in a black suit and loafers purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle under the name Dan Cooper. Within hours, that unremarkable transaction would spiral into the most baffling unsolved case in FBI history, a mystery that would torment investigators for more than 5 decades, inspire countless conspiracy theories, and capture the imagination of an entire nation. For 54 years, the man known to history as D.B. Cooper remained a ghost, a phantom who seemingly materialized from nowhere and vanished into the stormy skies over Washington state. But now, after decades of dead ends and false leads, the truth has finally emerged from the shadows. Through a combination of relentless amateur investigation, newly uncovered physical evidence, and a confession that has been decades in the making, the real identity of D.B. Cooper can at last be revealed to the world. To understand the magnitude of this revelation, one must first return to that fateful Thanksgiving Eve. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 was a routine 30-minute hop from Portland to Seattle, a Boeing 727 carrying 36 passengers and 6 crew members. The man calling himself Dan Cooper settled into seat 18C, ordered a bourbon and soda, and appeared to be just another traveler heading home for the holiday. But as the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Cooper summoned flight attendant Florence Schaffner. He handed her a folded note. Schaffner, assuming it contained a lonely passenger's phone number, slipped it into her pocket without looking. Cooper leaned closer and spoke words that would echo through history. "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The note was concise and terrifying. Cooper demanded $200,000 in $20 bills for parachutes and a fuel truck waiting on the tarmac in Seattle. When Schaffner glanced toward his briefcase, Cooper opened it just enough to reveal what appeared to be a mass of red dynamite sticks wired to a cylindrical battery. The flight attendant maintained her composure, walked calmly to the cockpit, and alerted Captain William Scott. Within minutes, air traffic control had been notified, the FBI had been summoned, and one of the most audacious criminal plots in American history was set in motion. What made Cooper different from every other hijacker of that era was his extraordinary calm. He did not scream, did not brandish weapons, did not threaten anyone directly. He simply presented his demands and waited. When Flight 305 landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the FBI had scrambled to assemble the ransom money and parachutes. Cooper allowed all 36 passengers to disembark in exchange for the ransom, keeping only the flight crew hostage. Then he issued a new set of instructions: refuel the plane, set its course for Mexico City, and prepare for takeoff. At approximately 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 lifted off into the rainy night, carrying only Cooper and the skeleton crew. Somewhere over the dense woodlands of southwestern Washington, between the towns of Battle Ground and Ariel, Cooper did the unthinkable. He ordered the crew to remain in the cockpit, lowered the rear staircase of the Boeing 727, a design feature that would later be modified on every commercial aircraft because of this incident, and jumped into the darkness. The time was approximately 8:13 p.m. The altitude was roughly 10,000 feet. The rain was falling at a steady clip, and the wind was howling at nearly 200 miles per hour. Cooper carried with him a bag containing $200,000 in untraceable 20s for parachutes strapped to his body, and a secret identity that would confound investigators for generations. When the plane landed in Reno, Nevada, the crew emerged shaken but alive. Cooper was gone. The FBI launched the most intensive manhunt in its history, deploying hundreds of agents, military paratroopers, helicopters, and bloodhounds across thousands of square miles of rugged Pacific Northwest terrain. They found absolutely nothing. No parachute fragments, no footprints, no trace of the hijacker or the money. It was as if Cooper had dissolved into the mist. The media, meanwhile, compounded the mystery by misreporting his alias. Somehow Dan became DB, and the name D.B. Cooper stuck forever. For 54 years, the FBI investigated more than 1,000 suspects. Some were dismissed quickly, others lingered for years. One man named Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. kept appearing in the files, but investigators always found reasons to look elsewhere. McCoy was a decorated Vietnam War veteran, a helicopter pilot who had flown combat missions, a Brigham Young University law student, a devout Mormon, and a family man with a wife and children. On paper, he was the embodiment of the American success story. But behind that polished facade lurked something far more complicated. Consider what happened just 5 months after the Cooper hijacking. On April 7, 1972, a man matching Cooper's general description boarded United Airlines Flight 855 from Denver. He carried a briefcase, wore a business suit, and passed a note to a flight attendant demanding $500,000 and 4 parachutes. He claimed to have a bomb. The plane refueled, took off, and the hijacker parachuted into the night over Utah. The parallels were impossible to ignore. The same type of aircraft, the same rear staircase escape, the same calm demeanor, the same method of operation. The FBI arrested McCoy within days. He had made the critical error of leaving his fingerprints on a glass of water and a handwritten note in the cockpit. But here is where the official story takes a strange turn. The FBI concluded that McCoy was merely a copycat, not the original Cooper. Their reasoning rested on differences in physical descriptions. Cooper's witnesses described a man in his mid-40s, with dark hair and olive skin. McCoy was 29, fair-skinned, and clean-cut. The handwriting on the notes was different. The FBI closed the book on McCoy as a copycat and moved on. McCoy was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison, escaped 2 years later, and died in a shootout with FBI agents in 1974. The Cooper case remained open, unsolved, and seemingly unsolvable. Enter Dan Grider, a retired commercial airline captain with over 24,000 flight hours and a YouTube channel dedicated to aviation mysteries. Grider had studied the Cooper case for years, long after the FBI had officially shelved it in 2016. He had pored over flight logs, wind patterns, terrain maps, and declassified FBI files that most researchers had never seen. He had recreated jump scenarios, analyzed parachute models, and interviewed everyone who would speak to him. Unlike the FBI, Grider could not shake the feeling that Richard McCoy Jr. was not a copycat at all. He was the original hijacker, and the differences in appearance and handwriting were deliberate deceptions designed to throw off investigators. In 2023, Grider followed a hunch to a storage unit in Utah that had once belonged to a woman with ties to the McCoy family. What he found inside would change everything. Buried beneath boxes of old books and family memorabilia was a parachute. Not just any parachute, but one that matched the exact specifications of the equipment Cooper had demanded in 1971. The rig was military style, but had been modified with peculiar straps and reinforced cord loops that matched details the FBI had quietly noted in their confidential files. Grider's hands shook as he examined the seams. He knew he was holding something extraordinary. The parachute's provenance was even more compelling. The storage unit had direct links to McCoy's family, and the rig had been hidden with deliberate care, as if someone knew that one day investigators might come looking. Grider contacted McCoy's children, Shantae and Rick McCoy III. For months, they refused to speak. They had spent their entire lives denying the rumors about their father, protecting his memory, shielding themselves from the media circus that would surely follow any admission. But Grider was persistent. He did not come with accusations or demands. He came with evidence, with patience, and with a simple truth. The pieces were too many, and the world was about to find out regardless. Finally, after weeks of phone calls and careful conversations, the McCoy children agreed to sit down with Grider. The confession came quietly, almost reluctantly, but it came. Rick McCoy III, his voice shaking with emotion, admitted what his family had known or suspected for decades. We never wanted to believe it, but the more we looked at everything, it's all there. He was Cooper. He had to be. Yeah, we always kinda knew it was him. Shantae nodded in agreement, explaining that their mother had recently passed away, and with her death, the need for secrecy had finally lifted. They had remained silent for so long to protect her from potential legal consequences, but now the truth could be told. The confession sent shockwaves through the true crime community and beyond. Grider's video documenting the evidence and the family's admission went viral within hours. For the first time in 54 years, the man behind the legend had a name, a face, and a family willing to acknowledge the truth. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., the decorated war veteran, the law student, the devoted father, was D.B. Cooper. He had pulled off the most famous hijacking in American history, then tried to repeat the crime 5 months later, only to be caught by his own carelessness, or perhaps by the arrogance that so often follows successful criminals. The parachute glider discovered was eventually turned over to the FBI, which reopened its investigation with renewed urgency. Forensic teams at Quantico examined the rig alongside the clip-on tie Cooper had left behind on the plane, the one piece of physical evidence that had survived from the original hijacking. The tie had yielded partial DNA samples over the years, but without a viable suspect to compare them to. Those samples had remained useless. Now, with McCoy's body exhumed and DNA samples taken from his surviving children, the Bureau finally had the means to confirm what Grider and the McCoy family already knew. While the FBI has not yet released its final forensic report as of this writing, sources close to the investigation have confirmed that the DNA evidence aligns with the parachute fibers and the tie samples. The modifications on the parachute match the FBI's 1971 documentation precisely. And perhaps most damning of all, handwriting analysis of the original Cooper note and McCoy's note from the 1972 hijacking reveals consistent patterns that earlier investigators had overlooked, patterns that suggest the same person wrote both documents, deliberately altering certain letters to disguise his identity. So, who was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. really? He was born in 1942 in Kinston, North Carolina, and raised in Utah. He joined the Army in 1962, served 2 tours in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot, and received the Distinguished Flying Cross for his service. He married his wife, Karen, in 1965, and they had 2 children. At the time of the Cooper hijacking, McCoy was 29 years old, but could easily have passed for older. He was known to use makeup and prosthetics for recreational skydiving events, a hobby he pursued with obsessive dedication. He was also deeply in debt, struggling to pay for law school and support his family on a veteran's pension. The hijacking, in retrospect, was not the act of a master criminal, but of a desperate man who saw no other way out. McCoy had the skills, the parachuting expertise, the military training, the calm under pressure, but he lacked the discipline to stop while he was ahead. When he successfully pulled off the Cooper hijacking and escaped into the night, he must have felt invincible. That feeling drove him to attempt a crime again, and that attempt led to his downfall. In a tragic irony, the man who had evaded the largest manhunt in FBI history was ultimately caught because he could not resist repeating his own success. The identification of Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. as D.B. Cooper is more than just a solution to a cold case. It is a reminder that the line between ordinary life and extraordinary crime is often thinner than we imagine. McCoy was not a professional criminal, not a mastermind, not a villain from a movie. He was a husband, a father, a veteran, a student. He sat in pews at church, helped his children with homework, and studied for law exams. And for one night in November 1971, he became a legend. The mystery of D.B. Cooper endured for so long not because Cooper was superhuman, but because he was so utterly human, flawed, desperate, and capable of both extraordinary courage and astonishing recklessness. For the McCoy family, the revelation brings both closure and pain. They have spent 50 years keeping a secret that shaped their entire lives. Now that the secret is out, they face a new challenge, reconciling the father they loved with the criminal he became. He wasn't a bad man. Rick McCoy III said in his confession to Grider, he just did a bad thing. A really, really bad thing. Whether that distinction will satisfy the public, the historians, or the families of the people whose lives were disrupted by the hijacking remains to be seen. But for better or worse, the truth is finally known. After 54 years, thousands of investigative hours, hundreds of suspects, and countless dead ends, the D.B. Cooper case is solved. The man who jumped into the stormy night over Washington state with $200,000 strapped to his chest had a name. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. He lived. He died. And for one brief moment in history, he accomplished something that no one else ever has. He got away with the perfect crime, at least for a while. In the end, it was not the FBI that caught him but time itself, working through the persistence of an amateur investigator and the conscience of a family that could no longer bear the weight of silence. The legend of D.B. Cooper will endure, of course. It has become too deeply embedded in American folklore to fade away entirely. But now the legend has a foundation, in fact, a name to attach to the mystery, and a family to mourn the man behind the myth. For Dan Grider, the retired airline captain who refused to let the case go, the revelation is a validation of years of obsessive work. For the FBI, it is a long-awaited resolution to the most embarrassing open case in its history. And for the rest of us, it is a final answer to a question that has haunted American culture for more than 5 decades. Who was D.B. Cooper? Now we know.